Hello everyone, TailSG here, back again with another daily Marvel Snap video. So today we do have the featured location that has gone away now. We are back to normal, still no patch, still no updates on the Colossus flashbang or any news of any cards. But what they have said is that there's going to be some pretty decent changes or shakeups to the rewards track next season. And so I am excited to see that reset next week. And so if you enjoy this video and you're not a subscriber, maybe consider subscribing. It helps the channel grow, it helps me out, and it'll help ensure that you don't miss any of our coverage on the new card releases or the new location releases, which all come out on the day of. And so moving on to today's video. Today I am featuring a deck list that was created by the user the Odinson, which seems like a fitting name for this Thor deck. The Odinson, if you haven't seen the name, if you haven't been checking out the Heroes for Hire event, and it does look a little small on our screen, but the Odinson is currently third for this week, or he's second in points over the entire course of this event. And he posted this deck list in the official Marvel Snap Discord as what he is running or has been running to be able to climb. So looking at it a little bit, it does have some of the elements of the Thor deck that we ran that had the lockjaw, but it has a lot more cards that are going to push consistency instead of pushing a potential max ceiling or max high roll. This deck list is not designed to compete or push power along with a high roll deck's high roll, but it can compete with a high roll deck's mid roll, low roll, and then it can just compete with most other decks with a good power push. And there are several tech cards that the Odinson did mention, but we are just going to run the deck list exactly as he presented it. He did say you could switch out Zero and Maximus for some counter cards or some tech cards. He said Sunspot is not an absolute necessity. And then there are a few others. You can run a few Guardians of the Galaxy to synergize well with Daredevil, and then a few other things that you can tweak with this deck list. But it is designed to have a very low mana curve. That way you're not going to be holding any of your potential power in your hand at the end of the game. And so running through the entire deck list really quickly, we have Wasp. This is going to be a good card or good target if we don't have her in hand by the time we draw into Jane Foster, because Jane Foster will draw out all of our zero cost cards. That's going to make our draw line more consistent. It's going to make sure that we get our high priority cards rather than drawing into the Wasp or something else that we may not need at that point in time. We have Sunspot. He is going to absorb power over time. So for any turns that you're not able to efficiently use all of your energy, he is going to absorb it and become stronger. Overall, he's a decent one cost card. He can grow pretty large, but the deck list isn't centering on him either. So most of the time he'll end up being mid-ranged, probably somewhere around 5 power by the end of the game. And then we have Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler synergizes really well with Angela. He's going to be able to be played and then be moved or shifted into another lane. So this is cool for dropping him into like something like Muir Island, where he's going to gain buffs every single turn. And then on the last turn, you can move him out into another location where he will retain those buffs. The same thing with Kunlun. He will get a bonus for getting moved into that lane. And like I said, he synergizes well with Angela, which we'll cover that in a minute. And next up we have Zero. Zero is going to remove the ability of the next card that we play. So this could be any number of cards. If we are just needing to push him onto the board, we could always do a Zero and a Wasp. We can do a Zero and a Maximus. Our two kind of key or priority targets. Other than that, it gets a little bit tricky. If we're dropping Daredevil on or after turn 5, we can always use Zero and Daredevil because it won't impact him negatively. But the key idea is to be able to drop this along with Maximus to maximize the amount of power you can get onto the board with that amount of energy. So 3 energy, 7 power is huge. 1 energy, 3 power is also huge for a 1 cost card. And then we have Angela. She is going to buff up for every single card that we play into the lane after her. And so we want to drop her first and then follow up with 3 other cards that will put her at 7 power. If we drop Nightcrawler into the lane first and then move it out, then we can potentially get Angela up to 9 instead. And then we have Daredevil. This is going to allow us to maneuver where we want to drop our power on turn 5. So if we drop this early, we get the information of how to position our cards better. We don't have to worry about dropping Iron Man in a lane that they ended up using a Hobgoblin in and completely countering us. we are going to be able to read where to place that power a little bit more efficiently to be competitive in those lanes. We have Scorpion. This is just a decent 2-cost card. It comes at a 2-power presence on the board, but it negatively afflicts all of the cards in your opponent's hand. So if they're running a Mr. Negative deck, potentially by the time you drop this, they will have 4, maybe 5 cards in their hand. Even if it hits 3, that is a 5-point power swing in your favor from a 2-cost card, which is a good power ratio or power presence. And then next up we have Bishop. Bishop, when you play a card, this gains +1 power. So very standard for a swarm style deck, but this list has the high roll potential of your Thor and Jane Foster while having the components of a swarm style deck because it so consistently pushes that early game and mid game power that it's very hard to compete with the consistency that those combos and that kit provides. And then we have our Maximus. If we drop this normally, we will want to drop it towards the end of the game or when they can't benefit from it. So if we get the feeling that they are going to drop a Mr. Negative on turn 3, we could always drop this if we have initiative before that. That way they will pull into their cards before they are inversed to have less of an upside from the Mr. Negative play. But the majority of the time, we're going to want to drop this either in a location where on reveals won't trigger or right after we drop a 0. And then we have Thor. He's going to shuffle Mjolnir into our deck list. And so this deck list isn't designed around making him an absolute tank or unit. He does that by himself. We are going to be able to thin out the deck if we get the high roll of the Thor and the Jane Foster. That's great. It's a 12-power card. And if not, we still have large amounts of power in our Angela lane, in our Maximus, in our Bishop for those potential win conditions, even without the Thor combo. And then following up on Thor, we have Iron Man. He's going to allow us to elevate the power level in a lane to a point that is very hard to compete with. It is very hard if they don't have an Iron Man of their own, or they don't have a counter to Iron Man to compete with that power level or that power presence that he offers onto the board. And then finally, we have Jane Foster, the mighty Thor. She is going to draw our 0-cost cards in from our deck, and as a result, she will potentially thin our deck by 1 or 2, depending on if we've dropped Thor or if we've drawn into Wasp. And then other than that, she's also a pretty decent power level at 8. So if you think about it, Chavez, America Chavez, a 6-cost card, is only a 9 power presence. At 5, she has utility and she offers 8 power, which is pretty big. And so you will notice that we don't have any 6-cost cards in this deck list. This deck list is designed to be able to flood as much of your power onto the board as possible by using efficient low-cost cards. Now, some 6-cost cards offer a huge amount of benefit, a huge amount of swing, but from a consistency standpoint, if you were putting all of your eggs in a destroyer basket, or all of your eggs in the leader basket, that is very contingent on you drawing that combo. With this deck list, we don't have to rely on drawing into any of those cards in particular. Even if we don't draw into our highest 3 cards, being Thor, Iron Man, and Jane Foster, we still offer a decent amount of board presence onto the board. It might not be enough to win, but we can still try to be competitive regardless. All right, and that is the rundown of the deck list. We are going to go ahead and jump into a few games. All right, so first up we have Rice. And for turn 1, we are going to skip. We're not going to play our 0 just yet. They do use Yondu, which does get our Thor. And so all of that smack talk that I was talking about, not needing to draw into Thor to make this deck list work, is going to be very quickly put to the test. It's just very funny how quickly that came into fruition. Oh my gosh. And so the middle location is going to be nowhere, and so our own reveal abilities are not going to happen there. So we can do something like a 0 to push 3 power there. We don't want to do it in this lane because we want to keep our own reveal abilities. We are going to go ahead and play our Daredevil into nowhere. We're going to play Nightcrawler into Wakanda. Nightcrawler is going to be safe in the Wakanda lane until the very last turn, and at that point we will move him over into Death's Domain. That way we can push a tiny bit of power in that lane. And so actually maybe we do, instead of Daredevil here, we're going to go ahead and do Scorpion and Nightcrawler. That will hit all of the cards in their hand next turn. As long as we drop Daredevil by the end of turn 4, we are fine. They won't get the advantage of reading what we drop or where we drop our cards. And so we are going to buff up our Angela twice here. which does give us a decent amount of power. They skip on turn 4, which is kind of interesting. I almost think we want to fill this lane up this turn. That way, if they do end up trying to do something like a hobgoblin or a green goblin, we will be able to counter it. They won't be able to send it our way, and then we can always move our Nightcrawler at the very end. Now, if they do something like a Professor X, that's going to lock all of our cards in here. It'll lock in pretty much the win here, but the potential loss in Death's Domain. So a couple of things to keep in mind going into turn 5, where they typically have a pretty big power push going into that final turn. So they do protect Nowhere as well. I do anticipate some form of like a destroyer deck here, and we draw into Wasp, so we no longer need to hold and drop Jane Foster into the Wakanda lane. I think we're going to go ahead and drop her into Nowhere. Both of these are protected, at least for now. And so let's go ahead and do that. I think that gives us a decent amount of power. And then they drop a card into Death's Domain. Is that the Professor X? Yeah, okay. So that is the Professor X. They do lock down this location. So unfortunately, we are not going to be able to win this one. We have to come down and win one of these other two. And so it all comes down to a read here. Do they drop their destroyer in the left-hand lane or the middle? Because if they drop it left, we can counter it with an Iron Man. If they drop it middle, we can counter it with an Iron Man. So it comes down to the read. I think Rice is going to drop it into Nowhere. We have a decent amount of power potential and being able to buff up our Angela even further. We have a larger lead in Wakanda, which would be easier for us to maintain or elevate over that 16 power destroyer drop. Okay guys, here goes nothing. If they pushed it in mid, then we win. Do we get the call correct for our first game out with the Thor Odinson deck? We do. We get the right call, which was technically a 50-50, but being able to kind of get in Rice's mind enabled us to still come out with the win in this location. Now, what would have been even better is if we had anticipated the Professor X on turn 5, which I had called it, we just didn't act quickly enough. We could have moved Nightcrawler over, and that would have made us push in Death's Domain, even though he locked it down, because as long as we had hit it with Scorpion, which we did, and I guess we didn't know that bit for certain. So either way, we did come out with a 2-cube win to start out. That was our very first match with this deck list. So far, so good. And we did have to draw into Thor, the Mighty Thor and Iron Man to make it happen, but we didn't have the big power play of regular Thor. And so let's go ahead and jump into another one. All right, next up we have Hulk Smash, and we do get Elysium. So we're going to be able to really flood the board here. We're going to be able to push out a lot of power very, very quickly. And it's going to be hard for them to compete with. But I do think we drop our Bishop on turn 2 into Elysium. Next turn, we will do our Thor probably into this location. We are going to get the +3 power bonus on our Wasp, which is going to be pretty good. Oh no, we discard our Thor. It is just not meant to be for us to have Thor. Unfortunately, they just don't want us to actually play the actual Thor here. So we can do Maximus, but I don't think that is going to be in our best interest. I'm going to go ahead and start stacking some power into the Elysium lane. We want about 3 cards here and about 3 cards here. That way we can make the decision of where we want to drop our Iron Man to elevate that power level. Ooh, and so then they change the far right lane into the Lechugia, which will shuffle rocks into our deck if we drop cards there. So we're going to avoid doing that for now. I think we go ahead and drop our 0. We will drop our Maximus, which will actually be a 10 power Maximus, because 0 is going to remove his ability. So he will get the buff from Washington, D.C., which is absolutely nuts. It's ludicrous how much power that is going to be from this combo piece. And they're not going to get the upside of drawing any additional cards because of the 0 play beforehand. Absolutely nuts. Look at that huge power play. That is a 13 power play on turn 4 that we would have been able to do regardless of if we had Elysium or not. Absolutely massive. And so we will get the read of what they're going to drop here. And they are going to do a Hulk because of Elysium, which is going to be interesting. Maybe we do a Sunspot and a Wasp, and then we hold out. We have 4 cards left in our deck. We have Jane Foster, we have Angela. I think we put Iron Man into Elysium. We have a pretty large power push in our Wasp and our Maximus into Washington, D.C., so if they want to push more, they're going to have to heavily drop the resources. And so we are going to flood the rest of our hand onto the board and hope that for this final turn we draw into Jane Foster. We could have held Wasp for an extra turn just for that like surprise potential, and that probably would have been best, honestly. But it is what it is. So we are 24 power here. Ooh, that is awful. Oh no. Okay. Do we think... So if they're going to push power, it is going to be in the Washington, D.C. lane. This is going to be a retreat, guys. We pushed a little bit too much of our power. We got a little bit overzealous with the Elysium play. Had we not, we'd have the flexibility to do like a Wasp and a Nightcrawler over here, or a Sunspot and a Nightcrawler. We could have done some pretty big plays into the Gia, but we did flood the board a little bit too quickly, I think. And so this is going to be one of those matches where it's going to be smart or tactical to retreat. We're not going to be able to compete with every single deck, every single game, but what this deck can offer is a consistent amount of power every single game. All right, so next up we have Zoo LXR. And first off, we do have 0, but I think we're going to wait until turn 2 to drop him. Turn 2, we can drop him, and then on turn 3, we cannot drop our Maximus. So Iceman did get the upside of hitting our Maximus, but that is better than it hitting our Thor or our Jane Foster, which would kind of nullify their viability, honestly. So I'm going to go ahead and drop Angela into the middle location. That's going to allow us to push quite a bit of power there. And then they hit us with the Scorpion. So they do have an early game swing as well, but maybe we can outvalue them so that we can come out on top anyways. So with the Thor and with the Jane Foster, that's going to be huge. We're going to have quite a bit of a power push. At some point, we will need to take the risk of Danger Room, but I don't think we risk one of our big, large units. Now, with Goose, we're not going to be able to play any 4, 5, or 6 cost cards there, but when we are ready to drop our 0 and our Maximus, which may end up being turn 6, we can push 8 power into that lane. It's going to buff Angela twice, so it'll end up being plus 12 power to this lane, which is huge, and is going to be a huge kind of sneak into that lane. Maybe we don't even need to address Danger Room here. And so I'm going to play our Thor into the Atlantis location. They are going to max out Danger Room, so they're pushing a lot of power into there. Ooh, and so then they steal one of our cards with Cable. But Thor had not flipped yet because they had initiative. We don't have to worry about them having stolen our Mjolnir. And they do have a capped out Danger Room. So if we were feeling kind of bold, we could try to cap their location, but I don't think we need to necessarily. I think we drop our Jane Foster, which will draw into our Wasp. It will draw into our Mjolnir, all of which we can drop on that final turn, along with the 0, the Maximus, potentially Nightcrawler. We can do a lot of good plays on this final turn with the low-cost cards that we still have in our deck, or in our hand. And so then they drop a Mr. Fantastic, which is not fantastic for us. So then there's the Wasp, there's the Mjolnir, and then that makes us actually that guarantees that we pull into our Iron Man. I don't think Iron Man is the play or is going to be needed here. I'm going to do the 0. We can do the Maximus, just because 0 is a large power card. I mean, I guess at 2 power now, it's not as large as what it would have been, but it's a decent power push nonetheless. And then we can drop our Nightcrawler. We can drop Wasp here as well for an additional 3 power into this lane. And then finally, we drop our Mjolnir. They have initiative, so they're not going to be able to hit us with something like a Shang-Chi. We are going to buff up our Bishop quite a bit, and then they're not really going to be able to compete with us in the Titan location either. I would snap, but I don't want to scare them off. Had we snapped a little bit earlier, maybe they would feel more confident. But as it is right now, we're just going to lock in this play. We're going to push so much power on this final turn, and they didn't play anything. Are you okay, Zoo? They didn't want to break the 5 power push of Daredevil, I guess, and they didn't think we would be able to turn Titan, I assume. Okay. So we do leisurely walk out with a casual 29 power in Atlantis, 16 power in Titan, most of which we dropped on that very final turn, to be able to kind of swing and surprise those locations and place that power where we needed to strategically so that we get the most bang for our points and for our power levels. All right, next up we have Faith, and we have both Thor and Jane Foster in our starting hand. Now, I think Faith might be a bot with Avatar with the very kind of standard first name, and then seeing a Quicksilver could potentially point to being a bot. So I'm going to go ahead and drop our Daredevil. Next turn, I probably will drop our Nightcrawler. That way he can get buffed up over time in Muir Island, and then we can actually move him into some other location where we need to strategically push that power. So we're gonna have about a 5 power push into any of the lanes that we want. And so they drop a Lady Sif, and then Crimson Cosmos. 1, 2, and 3 cards aren't going to be able to be played there, which is perfect for our Thor, our Jane Foster, or any number of our cards. So do we go ahead and just go big? We can go pretty large in this lane. So we're gonna have to play on curve on 4 and 5, leaving 6. So we're gonna have 3 cards that we draw into between now and then. I think we go ahead and dump our power onto the board. They're all gonna get a buff each turn from Muir Island, and we're gonna leave 1 spot open to be able to shift our Nightcrawler out, potentially draw into our Iron Man, or another resource that may potentially be more beneficial in that lane. And so let's go ahead and lock that in for now. Now, if they have a Killmonger, that hurts some of our power, but I still don't think it necessarily cripples our power potential either. We're going to play Thor into the Crimson Cosmos lane. It's going to be hard for them to push a lot of power there. And so I think between Thor, Jane Foster, and then Mjolnir, I think this lane will be a shoo-in. And then we just have to find a way to compete from Muir Island, which if we can draw into our Iron Man, beautiful, beautiful Iron Man, then we can elevate this lane by a lot. Okay, and so then we get our confirmation that this is a bot, but that is okay. Let's go ahead and snap on them. We're not holding any punches against bots these days. We are going to play our Jane Foster, which will draw into just our Mjolnir, so it'll thin our deck by 1, but we already have our key resources that we want anyways. If we could draw into our Sunspot, that would be the most ideal, because then we could at least drop the 1 additional power, but it's not something that I think would be absolutely necessary either. It'd be hard to place him because you can't place him in Crimson Cosmos or into the Hellfire Club. And so if we did that, we'd have to play him into Muir Island, which doesn't feel great. We are going to move our Nightcrawler into the Crimson Cosmos lane. We're going to go ahead and drop Iron Man into Muir Island, which is going to make this a massive lane. It's going to be very hard for them to compete with it. And then we can follow up with a Mjolnir really wherever. We don't have an Angela that needs to be buffed up. The Bishop doesn't need to be buffed up. So just dropping Mjolnir pretty much wherever we can to push a huge power here and a huge power here. And I'm not moving Nightcrawler into Hellfire Club just because I don't feel like 5 power is going to be enough to lock that one down. And so let's go ahead and lock this in. Smart bot. So we do still steal away 2 cubes. This deck is incredibly consistent. We are now 4 games in with it. All 4 games you have seen showcased. We lost the one, but it was more so from our greed than the deck itself. It still pushed an acceptable amount of power onto the board, which had we been able to drop that in like our last turn, we may have been able to push efficiently enough to win. But we are going to go ahead and jump into a couple more. All right, next up we have Loror. Unless that's a D, then it's Lore Doctor. We are going to go ahead and skip turn 1. As you can tell, I don't have my contacts in. We're playing blind right now, so everything's just a little bit blurry. So if you see me squinting, just let it happen. We're going to go ahead and play our Scorpion this turn. Next turn, we will do something like a Nightcrawler, maybe even a Wasp. That way we get the maximum upside of Muir Island here. We are going to hit 4 of their cards, so he's going to offer a 6 power presence from the Scorpion, which is huge. And then the last location is Subterranean. No. Oh no, the rocks love us. You hate to see it, but they do. We may be in rock collection mode. We may have 5 rocks by the end of the game, which would be mighty impressive. So they'd play a wave. We're going to be able to play any card in our hand next turn, which will probably end up being... I was going to say Jane Foster, but actually this makes more sense. We drew Thor through all of the rocks. We're going to go ahead and drop Thor into the middle location. That will shuffle a Mjolnir into our deck, And then we actually get the upside of drawing it here. We are going to make them draw 2 cards with our Maximus, which is kind of unfortunate. But we are going to draw into Mjolnir right off the bat. We have a pretty decently high power Subterranea as well. Most of the time they want to see something that is very low to the ground. Now this doesn't have anything that they can Shang-Chi, not any great targets for a Killmonger, and they still have to push an additional 4 power here, which is huge. I am going to go ahead and skip on turn 5. We don't have anything great because, I don't know, they pulled into it. And so they Shang-Chi the middle location, thinking that we would drop our Mjolnir this turn, I assume. Okay, so maybe is the play to not drop it? And this may be reading too much into it, right? So the thought process is maybe they dropped Shang-Chi, making us think that we were safe. And I start feeling like I go into conspiracy theory mode a little bit. If they have Odin, which could be, it's a wave deck. A lot of times wave decks will run an Odin to re-trigger wave. If they have Odin, they can re-trigger Shang-Chi, which at that point would kill him. That would put all of their power here, right? And so then we would win here and here. So they can't do that. I mean, they can. It wouldn't give them enough power. I'm actually going to leave Nightcrawler there. I don't think the Odin play will work out for them. Because then they won't get to absorb any power with Sunspot. They are losing Muir Island. I think we're fine here. And if they play a leader for the last turn, we just dropped a Mjolnir. Like, they're not going to be able to copy anything great. And so then here comes the Mjolnir, which will buff up our Thor. Right now we're winning this location. Ooh, so it's Dr. Doom, which means that we tie in Muir Island. We lose Subterranea by just 1, which for them having pulled in our cards and us not playing anything there naturally is pretty impressive. But we win Central Park by more than they win the Subterranea lane. So we do get to sneak away with that win here. That was a tough one. Had we moved our Nightcrawler, we would have lost because we would have ended up pushing too much power here. Oh my. All right, next up we have Crack Bowers or Crack Boars. I'm not sure which. But turn 1, we are going to drop Sunspot into Muir Island. That is going to let him buff up over time from this and from any energy that we don't use. And so then turn 2, we're going to drop Nightcrawler, which is a great Muir Island resource. We've drawn into Muir Island a lot today. They do a Mr. Sinister, which will buff up twice. If they are okay with dropping into Muir Island, we don't have to worry about a Cerebro deck, I don't believe. I could always be wrong. I'm going to go ahead and drop Bishop into Muir Island as well. That will pretty much be the last card we drop there for now, until we see where they drop their other resources. That is going to give us a really competitive Muir Island lane. And then next turn we can drop our Thor into Murder World. Ooh, so they do a Debris, which does feel a little bit rough, but we do have the upside of having the Nightcrawler that can move out of that lane. And so we didn't really get a whole lot of negative impact from it. We could always do a 10 power, a Thor, and a Nightcrawler to make them lose their Debris. I don't think it's worth the unnecessary risk, though. That would end up being 10 power, but I don't think it's worth potentially wrecking our entire competitive advantage. So they'd use Bucky Barnes and Carnage. That is going to put them at, what, like 12 power? So it is a good thing we didn't try to compete for Hala. And so turn 5 here, what do we think they're going to draw into or play into necessarily? I think we do we do something like Angela and Maximus, or do we move Nightcrawler this turn? We go ahead and play our Iron Man just to solidify our win in Muir Island. And then knowing that we have a 12 power push into Murder World as well. It may be a little bit ambitious or greedy, but I am going to go ahead and snap here. We have a pretty decent final turn play. And so maybe this is a goblin, a hobgoblin, which would feel pretty... No, it's a brood. Okay. So if they have, what, a patriot? Feels weird, but they have the Winter Soldier. So they could do patriot and Mystique here, which would end up giving a +4 power to all of these and all of these, but that is nowhere near enough. That's not going to do it. It's not going to do it for them. I don't think, unless they have a counterplay, I don't think they can compete for Muir Island, and they're definitely not going to be able to compete for Murder World here. Let's go ahead and lock it in. I just don't see any possible way. Maybe they play a leader for some reason, but that's still, they don't have enough space to really do much from it, and all they do is drop 1 card. Interesting that they ended up staying, because I don't see any version of the cards that they drop, or the 1 card that they drop. Okay, so they extend the game. I guess just getting a read for what we're playing, but they can still only drop their Patriot and their Mystique here. And so we do get a much larger Muir Island out of it. Now we're going to have our Jane Foster. We did allow them to draw into all of their cards, so they can play whatever cards they want. We know that they will probably do the Patriot Mystique, but from what we calculated last turn, it's not going to be enough for them to swing any of these locations, because at that point they're not pushing any power directly in those cards, and just what these tokens get buffed. Alright, so with that last win out of the way, we are going to go ahead and end the video here. Overall, this deck list does perform very, very well. It doesn't matter if you draw into your Thor necessarily, your Jane Foster. You have a really consistent amount of power that you push onto the board early, and then those cards are just kind of your late game power swings to push another lane in your favor. You might be able to compete with it without drawing into them, but ideally if you draw into one or two of them, it can really enable a lot more of your combo pieces and your power potential. I definitely recommend it if you are trying to push to infinite in the last couple of days of the season. I would recommend running something like this, something that is going to be consistent, and then just learning the ins and outs of the deck list, how it performs against different matchups, so that you can retreat when you need to, or you can snap when you have the clear advantage. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave it a like and a comment down below. It really helps the channel out. It helps the video reach a larger audience so that they can enjoy the content as well. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This has been TLSG. Later, guys.